We continue now at the top of Daf Memhei Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 45a. This Daf is sponsored by Shalom ben Noim in memory of Moshe Leo ben David. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a Daf, see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said, with regards to the carbon musaf, the parim, the elim, and the kavasim of the carbon musaf, they're not ma'akev zeh. And the simple explanation of that is that if there was a certain number that's given in the psukim, the number of parim, etc., that is not ma'akev. Even if there are fewer of them, that can still be brought as a carbon. That's what the Mishnah said. And the Gemara asked, what are we talking about when we're talking about the parim and kavasim? Which particular carbon musaf? If you're going to say we're talking about on sukkos, so there actually, it is a requirement. It is ma'akev. It says kimishpatam, and that indicates a requirement, so we can't be talking about sukkos. And so then the Gemara suggested what we're talking about is Rosh Chodesh, and we're talking about Shavuos, the karbanos that are mentioned in Chumash HaPikudim, which is in Sefer Bamidbar. That's the carbon musaf of Shavuos. But then elim, then rams become problematic, as the Gemara now continues and says, elim dehecha, what elim are we talking about? Idahanu, because if we're talking about, again, Rosh Chodesh, and we're talking about Atzeres, Shavuos, of Chumash HaPikudim, da'ayilhu, so over there it's just one ram, it's not in plural, and so we can't be referring to that, because again, in the Mishnah we said the rams, we said it in plural. And the Gemara continues, Ida Atzeres, the Torah's Kohanim, and if we're talking about Shavuos, the karbonos in Torah's Kohanim, that's the karbonos in Vayikra, that's what accompanied the Shtei Halechem, so there also wouldn't make sense, because Havoya Ksibuhu, because it says Havoya, and if it says Havoya, that indicates a requirement. Rashi explains, Havoya Ksibuhu Yiyu Ola, it says Yiyu Ola, that's a language of Havoya, V'chol Havoya Ikuva, anytime we have Havoya, that is a language of Ikuva, of requirement, as we've said earlier. And so therefore, again, what exactly are we talking about? Which musafin are we referring to in the Mishnah? And the Gemara continues and says, Liolam da'atzeres de Torah's Kohanim. Really, we are referring to the karbanos that are on Shavuos, that are in Torah's Kohanim, again, that accompany the Shtei Halechem. V'hachi kamar, and this is what we're saying. Lo elim de Torah's Kohanim ma'akvi le la'ayil de Chumash HaPikudim. What we mean to say is, the rams in Torah's Kohanim, the rams that are mentioned in Sefer Vayikra, those are not required. They don't prevent the fulfillment in terms of the ram that is in Chumash HaPikudim for the carbon musaf in Sefer Bamidbar. One ayil is not ma'akev the other. V'lo ayil de Chumash HaPikudim, and the ram in Chumash HaPikudim is not ma'akev lehu la'elim the Torah's Kohanim. It's not ma'akev the elim in Torah's Kohanim. That's what we mean to say with regards to the rams. But the Gemara continues and asks on this, Elaparim, but with regards to the bulls, what does the term ma'akvin mean with regards to the parim? That means da'afilo ahadadi lo ma'akvi, that they're not even ma'akev on each other. But ve'elim, but with regards to the rams, dahacha udahacha udolo ma'akvi, they're not ma'akev one set of rams to the other set of rams, but inu ma'akvi, but in terms of the rams themselves, those number of rams, that is ma'akev. And so therefore the line in the Mishnah, essentially the Gemara is asking, the line in the Mishnah, it's not the same, it doesn't have the same meaning with regards to the parim as it does with regards to the elim. As Rashi explains, V'kapar chashas, the Gemara asks, Heicha polgo l'tana hachi gabi elim mukmus. How can the Tana split the language in that fashion? By the rams, we're saying the elim ma'akvin zeh, that the elim are ma'akiv one another. In other words, we're saying that one does need to bring all of the rams. You have to have the proper number. V'gabe parim ukvasim, and by the bulls and the lambs, afilu dahadadi lo ma'akvi. There we're saying that the number is not ma'akiv of themselves, in and of themselves. Hanach dem chumash hapikudim. Again, the ones that are mentioned in Chumash HaPikudim, those are not ma'akev at all. In other words, with regards to the rams, what we're saying lo ma'akve means is it means if you don't have the rams of Chumash HaPikudim, you could still bring the rams of Torah's Kohanim. But in terms of the rams of Chumash HaPikudim themselves, you do need to have the right number of rams to bring those rams as karbonos. By the parim, that's not true. By the parim, we're saying even without the requisite number, Rashi mentions the kvasim as well. Even without the requisite number, you still bring them, and so therefore the terminology is different, and that's again the question of the Gemara, and the Gemara answers to that, Tana mili katani. It's true, the Tana is actually learning you're supposed to interpret the words differently for the different animals. There's one way to interpret in terms of the elim, and there's a different way to interpret in terms of the parim, in terms of the kvasim. And the Gemara continues, and although the Gemara does not say that the following is a brisa, it seems to come from a brisa, and the brisa begins and quotes from a pasuk in Sefer Yechezkel, V'yom HaChodesh, it says B'yom HaChodesh, which refers refers to Rosh Chodesh, Par ben Bakar, Tamim, Vishisha, Kevasim, V'ayil, Tamimim, Yu. So it says there's a Par ben Bakar, it says there's 6 Kevasim, 6 lambs, and it says there's Ayil, there's a ram. And so the Gemara asks on this pasuk in Yecheskel, this is with regards to the karbanos that are brought as Karban Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. And so the Brisa says Par, it says over here there's one bull. Ma Talmud Lomer, what does that mean? Lefi shenemar b'Torah Parim, because it says in the Torah Parim, that's plural. Uminayin she'im lo motza shnayim. So how do we know that if you don't have two, maybe echad, that one can just bring one par? Talmud Lomar Par, that's what the pasuk in Yecheskel is saying. It says par in singular. Even one is okay if that's all that's available. And Shisha Kavasim, it says 6 Kavasim, 6 lambs in Sefer Yecheskel. Again, Ma Talmud Lomar, what is the pasuk saying over here? Lefi shekasa b'Torah Shiva, because in the Torah it says 7 are brought on Rosh Chodesh. Uminayin she'im lo motza Shiva yavi shisha. So how do we know that if he doesn't find 7, that if 7 are not found, so then 6 should be brought? Talmud Lomar Shisha, so the pasuk says Shisha, meaning to say that 6 is also, if that's all that's available, that is sufficient. Uminayin shem lo motza Shisha, and from where do we know that if he doesn't find 6, Yavi Chamishi brings 5, and Chamishi Yavi Arba for 5. He doesn't find 5, he brings 4. Arba Yavi Shlosha, doesn't find 4, brings 3. Shlosha Yavi Shnayim, doesn't find 3, brings 2, v'afilu echad, and even 1. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, v'la kevasim kasher tasig yado, it says the kevasim as he's able to bring, as are available, and so therefore that tells us again, even 1. Now, since it says this, so Shisha Kavasim Lamali. So then the question is, why does it say 6? If it's true that it could be even less than 6, why does it say 6 in Yecheskel? And to that, the Brisa says, the Kama de Efshar Lahadure Mahadrin, and as many as we're able to bring, that's how many we should bring. And the Brisa continues, Uminayin shema'akvin zeh, and from where do we know that they are ma'akiv one another? This line in the Brisa is a little difficult. We'll see Rashi's explanation in a moment. But Talmud Lomar Yihu, the pasuk says Yihu, and Rashi explains, Uminayin shema'akvin zeh means as follows, according to Rashi, Im yesh lehem parim shnayim, let's say they do have 2 bulls, o kevasim shiva, or they do have 7 lambs, so then de'ein yecholin lahakriv zeh below zeh, then you can't bring this without this, then you have to bring all of them. How do we know that that is the case? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says Yihu, it says Yihu, it says V'sheshes kevasim ve'elim tamimim Yihu, that's the end of that pasuk in Yecheskel, and so therefore that says that it is ma'akvin zeh in a situation of yesh lem param shnayim o kevasim shiva. And the Gemara continues, the pasuk in Yecheskel says, Ko amar Hashem, so says Hashem Elokim, Barishon be'echad lachodesh, that's referring to the first month, the month of Nisan, on the first of the month. So this is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The pasuk in Yecheskel continues, Tikach par ben bakar tamim v'chitesas hamikdash. It uses the word v'chites. It sounds like we're talking about some kind of carbon chatos, but the carbon that's brought in Rosh Chodesh is not a carbon chatos. It's an ola, as the Gemara asks. Chatos, why does it say chatos over here? Olahi, it's really a carbon ola that's brought for Rosh Chodesh. What is the meaning of this pasuk? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan says, Parsha zu Elio asa l'darsha. This parsha is indeed difficult, and in the future, Elio and Navi will darshan what this pasuk means. The Gemara continues with an alternative explanation. Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Ashi says, Miluim hikrivu b'mei Ezra. There were Miluim, days of Miluim in the times of Ezra, by the return to the second Beis HaMikdash, Kederech sheikrivu b'mei Moshe, in the same way that there were days of Miluim when they inaugurated the Mishkan. There were special karbanos that were brought, and here in Yecheskel we're referring to the miluim, that the special karbanos that were brought in the times of Ezra. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Namihachi was taught in a brisa like this as well. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Parsha zu Elio osid l'darsha, this Parsha Elio in the future will darshan it. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi said to him, Miluim hikrivu b'mei Ezra. They offered miluim in the days of Ezra, kederech shekrivu b'mei Moshe, in the same way that they offered them in the days of Moshe. Amar lo, he said to him, Tanuach daitcha, your mind should be at ease, sheinachta daiti, because you put my mind at ease. And the Gemara continues in darshans another pasuk in Sefer Yecheskel, v'chol nevelu treifa min ha'of min ha'behema lo yochlu ha'kohanim. It says in the pasuk, all nevela and treifa are generally not kosher animals, from oaf and from behema, from bird and from animals. The pasuk says lo yochlu ha'kohanim, the kohanim shouldn't eat this nevela and treifa. And so the Gemara asks, kohanim hu de lo yochlu ha'yisrael achli, the kohanim they shouldn't eat, but Yisraelim they're allowed allowed to eat it? Of course not. It's not kosher. And the Gemara continues and answers. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Parsha zu Elio asad l'darsha. Again, this parsha in the future, Elio Hanavi is going to darshan this pasuk. Ravina Amar Ravina says a different answer. Kohanim itzrichle. It is necessary for the pasuk to teach about Kohanim specifically, because Sal Gadai T'chamina, one might have thought, Hoel v'ishtri malika legabayu, since malika, which is the pinching of the neck of the bird by bird offerings, by bird karbonos, that's not permitted outside the Beis HaMikdash, but it's permitted in the Beis HaMikdash for the Kohanim. So since that's permitted for them, so tishtri nami nevelu treifa, one might think nevela and treifa is also permitted for them, and so kamash malon, that's what the pasuk in Yechezkel is teaching. It's not permitted for the Kohanim either. And the Gemara continues in Darshans, another pasuk in Sefer Yechezkel, V'chein tasa b'shiva b'chodesh, so you will do b'shiva b'chodesh on the 7th of the month, me'ish shoga u'mipesi, from the person who is unwitting, from the person who is simple or ignorant, v'chipartem esabayis, and you'll atone for the house. And the question of the Gemara on this pasuk is, what carbon is brought on the 7th of the month? And the Gemara says, Shiva, when we say the 7th over here, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Eilu Shiva Shvatim Shechatu. This is actually a reference to a situation where 7 of the tribes, the majority of the Shvatim, they sin. And the idea is that they're going to bring a Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. We're talking about where a mistaken ruling was issued, and then the 7 Shvatim, they sinned based on the ruling. And the idea is, V'afal Pi She'ein Ruba Shel Kol, even though those 7 Shvatim, they're a majority of the tribes, but they're not a majority of Klal Yisrael, but that's still considered to be the tzibur, where the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur is brought. That's actually the carbon that the pasuk is talking about. And the Gemara continues, Chodesh, again it says in the pasuk, B'shiva b'chodesh, what that means is as follows. Im chidshu v'yamru, let's say they make a novel ruling that's incorrect, and they say chaylev mutter, that chaylev is mutter when it's really not mutter, and so that's talking again about a situation of Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. And when it says in the pasuk, Me'ish shoga umipesi, it talks about the unwitting individual and the ignorant, or the one who is simple. Melamed, that teaches she'ein chayav and ella al helam davar im shigas ma'isa, that when it comes to the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, there has to be both helam davar and shigas ma'isa. Helam davar, that's learned from umipesi. The idea is that mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin, and then Me'ish shoga, that's the shigas ma'isa. There has to be an action that is actually carried out, a mistaken action that's actually carried out based on that ruling. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Zochar oso ish latov, the following individual should be remembered for the good. V'chanina ben Chizkiya shemo, his name is Chanina ben Chizkiya. Shel molehu, that if not for him, nigna Sefer Yechezkel, then Sefer Yechezkel, it would be hidden away. Shahayu devar of sos from divrei Torah, because some of the words in Sefer Yechezkel contradict what is said in the Torah. And so therefore, Ma'asa, what did he do? Hela shlosh meos garbe shemen, he brought up 300 jugs, containers of oil, to keep the oil burning, to keep the light on at night. V'yashav ali, and he sat in the attic, v'darsha, when he darshened all of these psukim. Rashi explains, shlosh meos garbe shemen leneiros, this was all for candles, lahadlik balayl, in order to light them at night, uladarsho, and in order to darshan Sefer Yechezkel properly. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Im hayu lamparim merubin, if they had funds for many bulls, for the proper amount of bulls, but then they couldn't bring the proper nesachim, or they could bring less bulls with the proper nesachim, it's better to bring less bulls with the proper nesachim. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Braisa, the pasuk in Sefer Yechezkel says, V'efa la'par, it says an efa for the par, V'efa la'ayil, and an efa for the ayil, Yasa mincha, that's the amount for the mincha, again accompanying the par, accompanying the ayil, the mincha is an efa. V'la'kavasim kasher tasig yado, and for the lambs according to what he can afford, V'shemen hin lo efa, and then there's a hin of shemen per efa. Amar Rabbi Shimon says on this pasuk, V'chimidas parim ve'elam achasi, is the amount of the mincha for parim, for bulls, and elam for rams the same? It's not the same if you look in the Torah. Ella, rather, what does the pasuk over here in Yechezkel mean? Shem hayu lahem parim merubin, it means as follows: if they had many bulls, v'lo hayu nesachim, and they didn't have nesachim, yaviu parechur nesachav, better to bring one par in its nesachim, v'al yikravu kulan below nesachim, and don't bring them all without nesachim, v'im hayu lahem, and if they had, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Memhei Amid Beis.